I will start the introduction. So, good afternoon. Welcome to the 2022 Oregon Active Transportation Summit. My name is Gwen Shaw. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an engineer at Tool Design here in the Portland office. I'm part of the OATS Planning Committee, and welcome to the session on active transportation in Eugene. You can type your questions in the chat or use the raise hand tool. Both can be found at the bottom of your screen. If you're using social media, please use the hashtag OATS22 to post about the summit on social media. And don't forget to visit our website at thestreettrust.org to learn more about our other programs and activities. So now, without further delay, please welcome to your screen Shane Rhodes.
Thanks. All right, I'm gonna jump right in here, and I'm Shane Rhodes. I'm the Transportation Options Program Manager for the City of Eugene, and I'm excited to present today with Rob and Brody about shared and active transportation in Eugene. We're each going to run through about 10 minutes of some overviews about our organizations and how we are connected in the work that we're doing in Eugene. And we want to leave plenty of time for discussion and questions and see what people are most interested in learning about. I think each of us could pontificate for quite a while on sort of the work that's going on in Eugene here and how it's connected to the regional, statewide, and national movement to get more people using active transportation for more trips. We're going to give our Eugene perspective of what we're doing as partners in this work, and hopefully we'll have some good discussion afterwards. So, as I mentioned, this is a presentation not only about shared transportation in the sense of bike share and shared micromobility and transit, but also about partnerships and how we share the work that we're doing on the ground, in the field, and just day-to-day working collaboratively to have the most effect from advocacy to bureaucracy and everything in between. So I'm representing the City of Eugene, a public agency that provides infrastructure, services, and funding. And Rob and Brody will introduce themselves, but Rob's from Better Eugene Springfield Transportation, or BEST, and Brody is from Cascadia Mobility, a nonprofit that provides services to the public, including operating our bike share system. Before I jump into some of those finer details of what we're doing, though, I do want to highlight some of the work that we're all working on right now in Eugene, and that is on another partnership project that's happening this summer. In case you haven't heard about it, Oregon 22, it's the World Athletic Championships. It's a 10-day event that brings the world competition for track and field to Eugene and to the United States for the first time ever. It's taking place July 15th to the 24th and includes participants from 190 countries, 2,000 athletes, and 3,000 media attendees. It will give about 6 billion media impressions over those 10 days. It's a huge event, and in conjunction with that event, we are also, as the City of Eugene, holding a community-focused Riverfront Festival in our newest park in the urban core of Eugene along the Willamette River, the former eWeb site. And this park is just under 2 miles from Hayward Field and within 1.5 miles of that, connected via our famous shared use path system. It's a safe and comfortable and beautiful ride on a newly repaved portion of the Ruth Bascom Riverbank path. And we're excited to get people between the venues by micromobility options and hope to highlight that to the international audience that's going to be tuning into this event and really highlight all that Eugene has to offer. We'll also be incorporating not only our shared use path network, but our new 13th Avenue two-way protected bikeway as a main loop to get between campus, downtown, the riverfront, and around. So it's really exciting. It's a really sort of pivotal time for us to sort of mark where we are in the course of history, both in the track and field sense, but also in the active transportation world. So when we look back at how did we get here, I think it is important to look at the historical context. of where we come from and our roots in this active transportation movement. And I think Rob will talk a little bit about this winding path that we took. But this slide here shows, the different dates that piece that happened in this, timeline from the 70s all the way through the current time and into the future. But really going back about 50 years to when some foundational pieces happened in Eugene that really had an effect on the work that we're doing now. And so some of that has to do with when LTD, Lane Transit District, was founded, and our first footbridge over the river was put in, and that happened in 1970. Oregon's bike bill, as many of you know, was created in 71. That was also when Eugene's first bicycle committee was formed. Soon after that, we hired our first bicycle coordinator within the city, one of the first cities in America to do that. It became a requirement for some federal funding, and a lot of infrastructure work was done, and the next slide sort of highlights those pieces. But then sprinkled out through the 80s and 90s were some formations of some nonprofits and some work that happened sort of in the grassroots side, so that we had this bureaucratic piece that was happening with our bike bill and bicycle committee, but then also some grassroots pieces that happened, but they weren't always working really closely together. Each was sort of in their silo and doing their own work. And then we rounded the curve there in 2000, and our trans plan, one of our biggest transportation plans at the time, was adopted. And this was also around the time that the Ruth Baskin Riverbank Path system was getting more near completion and was actually dedicated as a system. And I think when you look at this timeline, you can see once we made that curve around and hit 2008, I think that was a really key time for Eugene for a lot of changes. That's when some bike advocacy organizations merged, Safe Routes to School program started locally. We created our first ped bike strategic plan in the city of Eugene, and U of O bike program opened up their program work. The Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee started back up after it was stopped in the 90s, or late 80s, early 90s. And so there was a pretty quiet time and sort of that advocacy and bureaucratic time where we just sort of rode the highs of the 70s as long as we could. And in 2008, I think we really saw some big changes. And then for the next few years, a lot of those plans started to happen where we implemented a lot of the programming that we talked about doing in those early plans. This is also the time that BEST was formed, and Rob will talk a little bit about sort of the pivotal time and what really brought that around on. And it's connected to transit. There's this real connection in Eugene with transit and bicycle and pedestrian projects and their overlap of infrastructure and programmatic changes. I'll also highlight that 2018 was when our Peace Health Rides bike share system launched. So it's still a pretty young system in that we just celebrated our 4th birthday. And I think that it's, again, another key reminder of the importance of the infrastructure and programmatic connection. Each time that we do an infrastructure project, it adds to our network and increases access for more people. And we, as a city, are trying to do more and more work to connect that infrastructure work to our programmatic work. And bike share is a clear example of where the infrastructure is there of a bike share system, but you've really got to have the education and outreach pieces in there. And that's where these partnerships come in that it's not just about the city building this infrastructure, but the city also needs to be there as support and sort of as a resource for others within the community to do the programmatic work, and even to do our own programmatic work overlaying with that. A great example of that is that our Safe Routes to School program is based in the schools, but the City of Eugene Recreation Program is the one that actually is going into the schools to do the instructing. So it's those layers of partnerships that are key to implementing our programmatic successes in Eugene. I wanted to highlight one of the projects that I was really excited to be involved in, and that's the Amazon Active Transportation Corridor. This was Eugene's first real protected bikeway that we installed. We've since installed one on 13th and are building one on High Street. And this just highlights the importance of infrastructure connected with programmatic pieces of education and outreach, and really connecting all of our program pieces to new infrastructure. Hopefully this audio will be connected in here as well.
There's no audio, but if you reshare and click the little checkbox at the bottom left, then it will, if you want to do that.
We'll try that again.
Thank you.
Thank you. There it is.
Imagine a city of Eugene where a bikeway for all ages and abilities connects the Ridgeline Trail and Spencer Butte in the south to the Ruth Bascom Riverbank Path and Willamette River in the north. The first portion of this Ridgeline to River connection is already complete, with the Amazon Path from 34th Avenue up to 19th. Now the southern portion has just been built with the Amazon Active Transportation Corridor. This new stretch of bike-friendly travel includes new bicycle and pedestrian signals, and a new diagonal crossing at the intersection of Hilliard Street, East Amazon Drive, and 33rd Avenue. And a new two-way protected bike lane on East Amazon Drive. Connecting with the Amazon Path, this safe and comfortable protected bikeway connects 4 schools and 4 parks, as well as residential and commercial areas, and it encourages people of all ages and abilities to ride their bikes for more trips. And over the next year, more improvements to the Amazon Active Transportation Corridor will be made, including upgrading the soft surface running path and installation of 4 new walking and biking bridges to connect East and West Amazon Drives over Amazon Creek. Infrastructure improvements like this are helping Eugene reach its climate recovery ordinance goals, its Vision Zero Action Plan goals, and the Transportation System Plan goal of tripling walking, biking, and transit trips in Eugene. The final phase of the Ridgeline to River connection is being analyzed as part of the Central Eugene in Motion study, which is examining the best way to connect the Amazon Path with the Riverbank Path. To learn more about this and other City of Eugene transportation projects, go to www.eugene-or.gov/2053.
And the exciting thing with that project is that in the video they talked about the Central Eugene in Motion project that was being evaluated, and that project has been complete, and we have gone out to bid and have construction happening this summer of the High Street protected bikeway that will connect the Amazon Trail to the Riverbank Path, and actually will end at the Riverfront Park at 5th and High. And really connect up with our shared path network. In the upper right hand corner here, you can see the Amazon Trail and 19th Avenue and High Street, and that's a new crossing that happens onto a two-way protected bikeway on 19th that will lead into the two-way protected bikeway on High Street. The picture below that is the 13th Avenue protected bikeway right after that was installed. You'll see the two-way protected bikeway on a one-way street with the bike signals, we are putting in the really similar facility on High Street with some improvements to the signals. We've learned a lot from the 13th Avenue protected bikeway project. And then I also wanted to highlight this 8th Avenue piece, in that we'll be installing our first protected bike lanes that aren't two-way protected bike lanes, but are just standard protected bike lanes on 8th Avenue through downtown from Lincoln to High Street. So it will connect up with this High Street protected bikeway. And then late next year, we'll be starting on a project on Lincoln Street for another protected bikeway system that connects from 13th to 5th Avenue. So some pretty exciting infrastructure changes that are happening in the city of Eugene that are really part and parcel with tripling our walking, biking, and transit mode share by increasing that all ages and abilities network. And then one final sort of plug I wanted to put in there that I did not clean up my slide from the logos, but a new mobility as a service app that we are working on in partnership with Lane Transit District and our parking within the city of Eugene, as well as Lane Transit District, Cascadia Mobility, and all of our transit and transportation related services, tying them into one trip planning app that we are calling Relay right now. It's from a project we call Project Zephyr, and we are actually hoping to launch a demo project of this during Oregon 22. So it's pretty exciting non-infrastructure project that again ties in with a lot of our infrastructure projects and improvements. So I'm going to hand it off to my partner Rob to talk a little bit about BEST and how the work that they do connects with what I just talked about.
You're muted, Rob.
Take two. Hi, I'm Rob Zako, he, him. I'm the Executive Director of Better Eugene Springfield Transportation, or BEST for short. We live in a representative democracy, so obviously we vote for elected officials, we pay our taxes, and we forget about them for 2 or 4 years. They just make amazing stuff happen, right? That hasn't been my experience living in Eugene for almost 30 years. Actually, every single thing we've done has been a fight, and it really takes a lot of hard work to support what Shane and his colleagues are doing to make it happen. So I'm going to talk very quickly about how we got to where we are today, and we're in a pretty good place and what we're doing. So next slide, Shane. So I moved here in '94 and have been involved in most of these things. One of the reasons my wife and I moved to Eugene was because of the Center for Appropriate Transport, which has done some amazing stuff of innovation and work bikes, recumbent bikes, and teaching kids how to build stuff and a do-it-yourself bike shop. But they never really engaged in advocacy so much. They weren't really promoting a political agenda. I was president of Friends Eugene, formed in '94. And they played a lead role in Transplan that Shane referred to, which basically ended in sort of a deadlock between the active transportation folks in our community and the drivers, the sort of progressives in the business community. And it was not a very successful plan. The Eugene Bicycle Coalition for many years tried to promote bicycling, and eventually in 2008 formed with Gears, which has been more of a riding club than a advocacy organization. All of these past efforts were a little bit successful, but didn't really sort of take off. BEST formed in 2012. Next slide. And we formed actually around transit. There was a project called the West Eugene MX that had been worked on for many years. There was a very effective lawn sign. If you look at the left image there, it says more buses everywhere, not MX. LTD standing for losing tax dollars, no MX without a public vote, and some other things. A very effective lawn sign campaign that really, I would say, put our city councilors on notice. And in 2012, the Eugene City Council was going to vote against, or there was not a majority of city councilors to vote for a $95 million project that was going to be funded by federal and state dollars. They were going to reject that and all that planning. BEST formed at this time. The middle picture here is at the time Eugene Mayor Kitty Piercy and Julie Daniel of Bring and Dave House of the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce and a bunch of other people holding signs that say MX, West MX, yes. We had a rally, and a few days after that, the city council voted 7-1 in favor of West Eugene MX. We had flipped 4 city council votes. We got the federal funding in 2017. The right picture here, West Eugene MX opened and has been operating quite well. Next slide. The way we were able to do that was sort of necessity is the mother of invention. We knew that we needed to get a bunch of city councilors to vote in favor of this project. Some of them were more business friendly, some of them were progressive, some of them cared more about social issues. And Best actually handcrafted a coalition so that every single city councilor had people on our board of directors and advisors that they looked to. So our coalition includes the University of Oregon, Lane Community College, Peace Health, Gears, NAACP, League of Women Voters, 350 Eugene, Better Housing Together, Safe Routes to Schools, Live, Move, Shelter Care, ARP Oregon, Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, and more. From our start in our DNA is really the idea of partnerships and the power of partnerships. There's a version of that called collective impact, but it's really when we join our voices together, it's very powerful, and we found that to be very effective. The downside of partnerships is we're a very diverse coalition. Best is not, we're not a bicycle organization. We're not narrowly an active transportation organization. We're not environmental. We're all the above, and we're pro-business and we're pro-social equity. And so we look for win-win solutions where many of us can say, yeah, that makes sense for our community, and we get stuff done. Next slide, please, Shane. David Bragdon had been the president of Metro Council. He's moved to New York and now heads up an organization called Transit Center, a foundation that supports transit. And they did some research a few years ago about what cities across America are really innovating around transportation. And the key finding of that study is what they call the cycle of change. What they concluded is you need three components really for a community to really innovate around transportation. Working backwards, you need agency champions like Shane. You need people who are committed and talented, who know how to make stuff happen. But Shane needs to have bosses that give him power to do that. If the city council doesn't want Shane building bike bridges or protected bike paths, it's not going to happen. And the elected officials, even though nominally they're the decision makers, they're very sensitive to public opinion. They really need to know that the public's behind them. And so the largest circle is the civic vanguard. That's Best and other NGOs and our partners. And we work to support, praise, push, criticize, connect, do what it takes to make stuff happen. And Best over the last decade has been increasingly effective on a series of projects making that happen. A few years ago, we changed the TR name from Transit. We were originally Better Eugene Springfield Transit. We're now Better Eugene Springfield Transportation. We work on transportation options of all sorts, safe streets. We brought Vision Zero to the community in walkable neighborhoods. We helped co-found Better Housing Together, are working for housing options that are affordable, that are closer to transportation options. Next slide, Shane. So Best has really been a small, lean and mean. We only have 2 staff, and we do amazing stuff with 2 staff that educate and advocate. But last summer, in sort of a complicated multi-way negotiation, the building that for 30 years had been the Center for Appropriate Transport became available. Sadly, CAT decided to dissolve, and they're no longer in operation. In a roundabout way, Best was offered the building by its owner. And so although that isn't what we do, or didn't think it was what we do, we stepped up to that and are now property owners, property managers, and we're creating what we're calling the Nest, the Nexus for Eugene Sustainable Transportation. Some pictures here of the outside and folks talking about what that could be, and the inside. And maybe this is a good time to transition, Brody, because our anchor tenant, who's going to be moving in, I hope next week or later this week, is Cascadia Mobility. Welcome to the Nest, Brody.
Thanks, Rob and Shane. I'm Brody Hilton. I'm the CEO of Cascadia Mobility. We're the nonprofit operator of Eugene's bike share Peace Health Rides. While I lived in Eugene in the late 90s and 2000s, I was not involved in the transportation scene. I was a silly college student having a good time, and I've been in Portland for the last 20 years, launching bike share programs around the country. One program I oversaw in one of my previous careers was the launch of Peace Health Rides, but with a different company. When the pandemic hit in 2020, the operator of Peace Health Rides, which was a company owned by Uber, decided to fold up and walk away, leaving Eugene holding the bag with its bike share system. Shane and his team picked up the pieces and brought the employees on and sort of held it together for a few months while the city issued an RFP for a new operator, while I sort of remodeled my kitchen with my time off. At the same time, the state of Oregon, the Oregon Department of Transportation, issued an RFI, which essentially asked, look, 5 small cities in Oregon all lost their bike share programs. Does anyone have any ideas? Eugene was one of those communities. The others were Salem, Corvallis, Ashland, and I'm forgetting one, Bend. And so I was contacted by Fourth. Fourth is a nonprofit based here in Portland. It's a national electric vehicle advocacy organization. They reached out to me and made me aware of the ODOT RFI, asking if anyone had ideas. And we decided to collaborate on the notion of starting a new nonprofit whose core mission would be to launch and operate equitable shared transportation programs at scale in partnership with small to mid-sized Oregon communities. ODOT ultimately thought this was a good idea and said they'd give us some dollars, which we said we'd only accept if we also pursued and were awarded the contract to operate Peace Health Rides. The idea being, if we don't have a project, we don't really have any credibility. But I knew that I and the team that I've retained and brought on to carry things forward in Eugene do have credibility and a ton of experience. We're very experienced operators. I've been doing this for a dozen years, and my team on the ground in Eugene has been doing this for at least 4 or 5 since the program there started. So we went after that Eugene contract. We won it. We've accepted the ODOT funding to launch Cascadia Mobility. We're in the process of securing our 501c3 designation right now. And we're working not only to really stand up Peace Health Rides and improve the service, we're also working on a number of other projects. As a small, scrappy nonprofit, we're able to go after some grant funding. We're able to get into alternate programming, and we're working with other Oregon communities to get their bike share programs back on their feet, and with ODOT. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slides. But the fundamental question for communities, particularly small and mid-sized communities, is bike share transit, or is bike share a private business? And our position is that bike share should be a public service. It should be an extension of transit. Thanks, Shane. You can jump to the next one. Keep me moving. So why nonprofit bike share? Bike share, particularly in small communities, but really everywhere, including here in Portland, is a high risk, low reward proposition for anyone. That is to say, it's labor intensive. There's lots of ways it can go wrong. And the upside from a financial perspective isn't very high. Nonprofits allow the cities to retain control and create those community connections that Rob and Shane were talking about. We're part of the community. We have a local sponsor. We work with other nonprofits. We collaborate on all manner of outreach and programming. We have won a grant award recently to improve our low-income access plan from the Oregon Health Authority. And so we are grant eligible as a nonprofit. As I said, we just won that award. We'll be pursuing other opportunities to increase our outreach within the Eugene and Springfield communities. In fact, Springfield is a place we're very excited to potentially expand into soon. We offer financial transparency in all of our work. It's open books, so the city knows exactly how our dollars are spent, and we collaborate on how best to make the trade-offs between spending more money and reducing our operating costs. We're bridging a critical needs gap, not just in bike share, but in other forms of programming. And as I mentioned, we're entrepreneurial, which means we're trying to find other ways to offer services and programming in Eugene, in the region, and in the state. Next slide, please. So as I alluded to, we do get involved with other things. We've started to take on bike valet for citywide events. We've acquired valet and event racking infrastructure. We'll be providing a few different bike valets and event racks at the Active Transportation Hub for the Riverfront Festival, which Shane talked about. We have started to do community rides, outreach and education, particularly in partnership with the community-based organizations that help identify candidates for our low-income free pass programs. So we'll be doing a lot of community rides and learn to rides to lower the barriers to access and help people get really comfortable on bikes, and particularly on bike share bikes, since they're everywhere. What we're trying to do is mainstream biking and make it accessible and easy for everyone to ride. Beyond those things, the city will be launching a shared e-scooter pilot, which will hit the ground at some point in the summer. We are in conversation with the city and the vendor that will ultimately operate that or provide the equipment for that program, for Cascadia Mobility to also do the operations and outreach for the shared e-scooter program, so that we can be coordinated in all facets of the bike share program that we run. And it just sort of doesn't make sense to duplicate the work that we're already doing with our teams in the ground, with our electric trike and our van and our mechanics and our outreach team. Why not fold shared e-scooters into the mix so that we can elevate access to non-vehicle modes throughout the city and make great use of all that infrastructure that Shane and his team are building. Next slide. And then, so what's next for Cascadia Mobility? We have been spending the last 2 weeks upgrading all of the technology on our bikes, which is fantastic. They were a bit of a struggle through the pandemic and over the last year with push button. For those of you in Portland, you remember the Biketown bikes. There's a bunch of them that we took donation of that are in our new building, the Nest, which we'll be moving into here in the next month as Rob gets it ready for us to come in. The technology on the Peace Health Rides bikes is the same technology as was on the old fleet of Biketown bikes in Portland. We've swapped all the technology now to a QR code, scan, unlock, so much faster, so much easier. We have about 250 Biketown bikes in storage. We're hoping to refurbish, repaint, and redeploy those either in Eugene, Springfield, or potentially in another community, so that we can have a connected, interoperable bike share program either in the city or elsewhere. We are working with ODOT to secure some federal infrastructure dollars that will be allocated for multi-city interoperable electric bike share and as well as pedal. So we're just in the beginning stages of planning for this project. This is very exciting for Cascadia Mobility, and we hope will be a model for not just communities in Oregon, but nationwide, convening small communities, identifying resources, pulling people together to benefit from the power of collaboration and the power of information sharing, cost sharing, and the economies of scale that come with a broader coalition of partners across all cities, which also, I hope personally, allows us to do some transit integration work, which I think is critical to the ultimate success here. So that is, oh, and then I forgot to mention, we're also getting into cryptocurrency, which is any good bike share company is doing. We're doing that as well. I'm just kidding. We're not getting into cryptocurrency. That's my presentation. Thank you, everyone. Any questions, comments? We welcome those.
Thanks, Brody. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, let's open it up to questions and have some discussion. Yeah, I didn't have a chance to see the chat. Do we get anything going in there?
I haven't seen anything in the chat, but people can feel free to put things in the chat or just go ahead and raise your hand and we can
Can I ask a question of the audience if the audience doesn't have a question for us?
Absolutely.
I presume that at least some members of the audience are from Portland, and just curious, what you see that we're doing in Eugene that you're also seeing in Portland, or what are we doing in Eugene that maybe you aren't seeing in Portland or elsewhere around the state? I don't mean to be Portland centric.
Hi, Rob. I'm actually not in Portland, but I am in the city of Milwaukee, just to the south. And we are very interested in active transportation. And I'm actually one of the city councilors, and we have climate action as one of our goals and are very familiar with a lot of what Eugene is doing. And this is really exciting to see because the conversation around the final mile is real. So I was glad to hear you both mentioning integrating with transit, particularly as we're seeing all of the challenges that transit is having in the post-pandemic, if we can call it post-pandemic period of time. So I guess I'm just interested in hearing a little more about how you've thought about doing more with smaller cities. If you want to get into a little more specifics about that, I thought it was interesting that you brought up the possibility of having sort of collaboration between smaller jurisdictions on bike sharing programs and other ways to get people active. And I'll also throw out there that we have our own mini version of Sunday Parkways that is Carefree Sunday that we do just one day in August. And it would be super fun if we could get you all looped in to maybe do a little bike demo, bike share, something or other at that, because we do have a lot of sponsors and engagement from various folks in that. Anyway, that was a lot.
Yeah, well, Kathy, I'd say, given Milwaukee's proximity to Portland, that, primarily Cascadia Mobility's focus is really everything outside the Portland metro area, which isn't to say we aren't interested or couldn't help with different programming or operations pieces of active transportation programs in the region. But because Portland's such a large player and because Biketown is already such a success here, I am having these conversations with ODOT about how to allocate federal dollars and what makes sense and what portions might be allocated to smaller communities versus Portland metro area. And I would say that, talking to Elliott Rose at Metro would be a good thing to do, because I think some federal money will ultimately flow to the Portland metro region to expand bike share and to expand some of the programming that we talked about, but that the convening entity might best be served, might best be played by Metro. And it seems only logical to me that if bike share were to be in Milwaukee, that it might be an extension of the already existing Biketown program here. There are lots of different takes on that, and certainly we'd be happy to have a conversation about launching something that's separate from the Biketown network, but it feels to me like a logical extension. I just rode a Biketown bike this weekend down to the Selwood Bridge, and I was practically in Milwaukee, right? So it's like, it feels like that's your opportunity, is perhaps reaching out to Metro and seeing what they might say about that. Have you tried that?
I haven't, but I did just go to the Biketown presentation earlier today, and their idea of expansion is to add a small section of North Portland. So I just caution you. Yes, right. I have used Biketown bikes when family's been in town to ride all over Milwaukee, but we do not have stations in Milwaukee, and I think there might be more barriers to that than you might realize. But I'm glad to hear that you're having those conversations with ODOT, and for what it's worth, you can say, I know of at least one jurisdiction near Metro or in the Metro area who's interested in having further conversations around this.
Absolutely. It's a really exciting time with the federal infrastructure money and the carbon reduction money coming out of the US DOT flowing into ODOT. And I think there will be allocations, not just for, as I said, I think Portland Metro will get a good chunk of dollars.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bertie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight one of the things that Kathy brought up was the connection with transit and that first last mile. And I think that's one of the exciting things, is that Rob has done a lot of work with BEST around Lane Transit District and the need for, the advocacy work to make better transit, and not only in the transit system, but also in sort of what Lane Transit District sees as transit. And they're a partner in our bike share system to a point, but I think that, working on that relationship and building that understanding by leadership within LTD is a really important piece of the work, and having advocates and those in LTD who know sort of what that need is of making that connection between first and last mile. We're really lucky in the size of community we're in, and that we have a really great transit system, and we're small enough to make some really powerful partnerships happen. And I think that that's one of the key pieces that we're going to see in the future is, you know, more of that blending of what is transit and really seeing bike share as a key piece of that transit system, and e-micro mobility in general with e-scooters and parking and bike parking and sort of all of this interconnectedness. And that's our project Zephyr, that is using the mobility as a service app, to where you have one app where you say, I want to go from A to B, and then it shows you all these different options of, hey, you can take bike share this far and then take transit and then walk, and then, you know, or you could drive to here and go to a park and ride and take transit, you know, like all that blending that really gives people those true options and the ability to pay and maybe even have bulk and combined memberships within that tool is definitely a piece that I think other communities are trying to crack that nut. And Eugene is at this real sweet spot of big enough to have a lot of those services, but small enough for the organizations to be able to work together to make it actually happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, you know, given that we work with ODOT on some of this planning and thought leadership around, you know, shared and active modes as transit, I think ODOT as the fiduciary responsible for distributing those federal dollars and responsible for distributing transit dollars really understands the value of bike share, e-scooter share, e-bike share, and other things like van pools, bike lending libraries, and so forth, that are all part of what you might call the transit mix, and that we might expect to see an increase over the coming years in funding available for not just pilot programs, but really expanding programs and integrating with transit in communities and across cities. That's our hope.
Let me jump in here and echo some of these themes. There's a tendency to label people by the vehicles they use. Oh, he's a car driver, she's a bicyclist, he's a pedestrian, as if, you know, we're sort of separate species and we only use one mode at a time. The providers do that, and that's perhaps more understandable. A transit agency knows buses, and so they think in terms of buses and so forth. But all of us are people, and we're just trying to get around. There's an imperative for us to drive less for a lot of reasons, climate change being one of those. But if you own a car and are paying for the car and insuring the car, it's really convenient to use, and you're going to use that car because it's convenient, and the incremental cost isn't that great, even with high gas prices. But if we can have an ecosystem of a lot of different transportation options, sometimes the bus works, sometimes bike share works, sometimes an e-scooter, sometimes you carpool, sometimes you walk. You know, if you have a bunch of different options that you know that there's going to be a way that you can get to where you need to go, more people can go without a car or go with one less car. And that's where we need to get to. I'm preaching the choir, I know. I just want to say that.
Thank you all. This has been great. We do have 15 more minutes in this session, so if folks have any questions, I think we can keep going them. I think I'll respond. Rob, you had the question of just kind of what's different in Portland versus Eugene. I think there's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of differences, but one thing that stood out to me was just the fact that, you know, BEST is, as you said, they're not just a bicycling advocacy group. So I think I know the Street Trust has started to go that way, which has been great. But I think the partnerships with all of the groups that you identified, that's something that is in progress, I think, here in Portland. And it happens sometimes and it doesn't in other times. And I think the recent getting there together, the bond or the transportation measure was a good one of bringing a lot of diverse groups together in terms of transportation advocacy, housing, land use, all of those things. So I think that's one lesson I know I will be taking away from this, is the successes you guys have had is really those partnerships and the broadness of them and what that means to speaking to those elected officials and to the decision makers.
Thank you for reminding me, Gwen. I wanted to say, we think of the Street Trust as sort of our sister nonprofit up in Portland. And of course, the Street Trust started as the Bicycle Transportation Alliance. They were a single mode focusing on bicycling, and BEST started as Better Eugene Springfield Transit. We were also single mode focused on transit. And both organizations evolved to see that really active transportation or multiple modes is what it's about. I think there's a danger if a advocacy organization is too closely associated with a particular mode, they're come to be seen as a special interest. Oh, it's those bicyclists, and they want their handouts. They want special things that car drivers or walkers don't get, or, oh, those are just the bus riders. By being broad and saying, no, we're for people, for transportation choices, that's much more powerful. And I think we're seeing across the country a move towards multimodal advocacy organizations. So yes. The other half of what you said, being a broad coalition is a double-edged sword. When we agree, it's incredibly powerful, but that agreement doesn't come automatically. We don't always see things the same way that the Chamber of Commerce does. And there's a relationship there that we've really value, we've worked on, and we've learned from each other, and we've made accommodations to make that work. It's resulted in us going slower and maybe not being as radical or liberal as we might otherwise be. But the flip side of that is we've made an incredible amount of progress. And we know that if we tried to do things and get too far out ahead of the business community, we would get to a point where we're going too far, we would just get stuck. And so if we bring them along and work with them and build trust and educate them, and other segments of our community that have different points of view. If you look at the slide I showed of all of our partners, BEST, Live Move, which is the UO student organization, and Gears were really the only transportation-oriented organizations. All the other organizations had other primary focuses, but transportation was related to what they do. And so it's really a work to sort of bring together the community and broader coalition of people.
Yeah, I've had that same experience here on the Better Block projects here in Portland, similar of kind of broadening it, working together, bringing the community, the business community on board, because ultimately they're going to be a key partners in the sustainability of these types of projects and programs. So yeah, very, very good to hear that, and kind of a good reminder for us all.
Yeah, and I think one of the other key pieces there too is the difference between the grassroots and the grass tops, and that BEST has done a lot of work sort of on that grass tops. And in the past, we've had a lot of advocacy that was very grassroots, and really the importance of blending those and having organizations that are doing all of those, I think is really key, because if you have an organization that is just working grass tops, they're not necessarily as connected, or might not be as, Rob said, extreme or liberal or progressive as people might want. And so I think you need that grassroots sort of pushing the edges and asking for even more, so that those working at the grass tops level can use that as sort of an edge and work on those, finding those common grounds.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I think it was the opening session this morning, Danny Cage, one of the youth advocates, brought up that one of the greatest things he's learned about committees is to bring back the community voices that you hear and are involved in to the committees when not everyone's at the table. And it was just funny, he said that he got to use an example of being told, well, we haven't heard that from anyone, and he got to say, well, I heard it from 40 different people that work in, that live in this community, so I don't think you're right. And it was just so powerful to be like, yep, that's, we have to bring the community to the committees and work on both sides, all sides, top and bottom. So it's like another good, I had not heard the grass tops, but I love that.
Right. And then I guess, in the same way that the Street Trust, has moved away from strictly bike advocacy, and BEST is not just about transit, I'd say you know, Cascadia Mobility on the ops front, maybe we're sort of like the landscaper, right? Like we're trying to provide the operations and programming that supports all of the advocacy and all of the city programming to be an extension of the work and the infrastructure that the city puts in to really optimize the infrastructure and the resources we have to really bring people along for the ride, so to speak, and make sure that the programming and the infrastructure is all well used.
So when we build the huge traffic garden, you'll handle all the programming, Brody?
That would be great if we can pull that off. So this is one of the exciting things that Shane wants to do in Eugene is the NEST, the Nexus for Eugene Sustainable Transportation, where we'll be moving in, is, if you know, Eugene is right next to Skinner's Butte, just on the west side of Skinner's Butte near Washington Jefferson Park, right across the street from Washington Jefferson Park. And so we'll be moving in there. We'll be sharing that space with other active transportation nonprofits and for-profits, and eventually hope to have a community bike shop and different classes and DIY bike repair and some other fun activities happening there. And across the street from that, the park, Shane wants to build a traffic garden, which is, for those probably most of you know, where people come and learn how to ride a bike and learn how to, particularly kids, learn how to feel comfortable in traffic and build that on into, I'm just speaking for you now, Shane, but into a pump track, which would be adjacent. But there's some interesting tie-ins with some of the work that Shane and the others at the city want to do there from an infrastructure standpoint. And yes, absolutely, we want to be able to provide any programming to support that infrastructure that the city might build, and we hope to do that. So it's an exciting time and an exciting space there.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the pieces that I didn't really touch on is, you know, in that curve of history, that we are at this really great turning point, and we're at this place where we're at a tipping point at the City of Eugene. And you know, I feel like we've been gold for quite a while now as far as a bicycle friendly community and a walk friendly community goes. And I feel like the work that we're doing now is really to push us to that platinum level. And we've laid a lot of the groundwork, and now the infrastructure is going in, the programs are happening, and like we are definitely the best bike city in Oregon. Like, sorry, Portland, but like Eugene is a great place to ride a bike and getting better. And so like the things that are going to happen in the next 10 years, I think it's really an exciting time to see where our transit and transportation, you know, active transportation, walking, biking network is going. But this is sort of a, you know, that stake in the ground of this is that turning point, and you know, watch out, because here we come.
Well, that seems like a pretty perfect wrap up to this. So there is technically 5 more minutes. If anyone has any final words, but I also know that we all have busy days, and I think there are some in-person things to get to if anyone needs to travel into Portland still. There's 2 events at 4 o'clock that I'll just go over really quickly. There's the Afro Village home base. So how retired MAX train cars will help advance equity and sustainability in Portland's Black and Brown communities. That's located at the Providence Park MAX station. And though it is currently sunny, at least in my part of town, I know that there is a rain plan. You can go inside of the train that is there. There's also a Greenways bike tour with Roger Geller. They're meeting at the Salmon Street Fountain at 4 o'clock. And then there's a Safe Routes to School networking happy hour this evening at Ron Tom's starting at 5. So those are all the in-person events going on. And yeah, any final things? Otherwise, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to our